January 1996, the heat in Minas Gerais was the kind that makes the asphalt melt and the air turn heavy, hard to breathe. But in Varginha, what was weighing on the air wasn't just the humidity or the heat haze. It was fear, genuine panic. You know when you feel something is wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it. That's exactly how it started. Forget that sanitized image from science fiction movies, with pretty lights and emotional close encounters. What happened in that vacant lot in Jardim was dirty, smelly, and visceral. It was a glitch in the matrix of reality that the Brazilian army has spent the last 30 years trying to sweep under a rug that can no longer hide anything. I keep thinking about what went through the heads of those three girls, Liliane, Valkyria, and Katia. They were ordinary girls coming home from work, taking a shortcut through a lot full of weeds and rubble. They weren't looking for fame, they didn't have cameras, they didn't have a script. It was 3 in the afternoon, the sun was high. There's no way to mistake a shadow or a dog for what they saw. And what they saw, crouching by the wall, was not an animal, and it certainly wasn't human. Their description gets to me every time because it's too specific to be a child's invention. Oily skin, dark brown, bulging veins that seem to pulse in the neck, and that smell. Everyone who got close to this story talks about the smell. Ammonia mixed with sulfur, something that stuck to your nose and made you want to gag. The creature was huddled. It seemed to feel pain, fear. The eyes were large, red, without pupils, and they didn't blink. When the creature slowly turned its head toward them, the panic was instinctive. Valkyria said she thought it was the devil, and who can blame her? If you come face to face with something that Earth's biology doesn't explain, your brain looks for the closest reference. And in the heart of Minas, the reference for horror is the devil. They ran. They ran as if their lives depended on it, and maybe they did. But this is where the story stops being an urban folklore tale and turns into a military conspiracy thriller that even Hollywood couldn't write. Because even before the girls screamed, the city was already strange. Residents reported the movement of army trucks from the School of Sergeants of the Arms, the ESA, located in the neighboring city of Três Corações. What on earth would the ESA be doing in a residential neighborhood of Varginha on a Saturday afternoon? It makes no logistical sense, unless they already knew, unless they were hunting. And that's where the detail that keeps me awake at night comes in. The fire department was called, but not to put out a fire or get a cat out of a tree. The call was to capture a strange animal. And when the firefighters arrived, the army was already there. Think with me. Since when does the Brazilian army coordinate a joint operation with firefighters to catch a jaguar or a stray dog? Never. The hierarchy there was clear. The military gave the orders, the firefighters obeyed, and no one could say anything. The isolation of the area was too fast, too efficient. They knew what they were looking for. And there's more. The creature captured in the morning, even before the girl's sighting, was taken in a wooden box covered by a tarp. Witnesses saw the truck speeding away. But it didn't end there. It seems it wasn't just one being. There were 2, maybe 3. Chaos was established. The city became a stage for a silent war. The phones wouldn't stop ringing in local newspaper offices, but information was cut off and sources were intimidated. You know what's most insulting about this whole story? The official explanation that came months later, the military police inquiry, the famous IPM. They had the audacity, the courage to look the Brazilian population in the face and say that the 3 terrified girls mistook the creature for a homeless man known as Mudinho, who was supposedly covered in mud and crouching in the rain. Seriously? First of all, it wasn't raining at the time. Second, the girls knew Mudinho. The whole city knew Mudinho. He was harmless, part of the urban landscape. To compare a human being, even one with mental and physical disabilities, to a creature with red eyes, slimy skin, and 3 protrusions on its head is an intellectual dishonesty that borders on cruelty. It's calling us idiots to our faces. And what about that dwarf couple? Remember that? The army tried to push the theory that at the hospital where there was other strange movement, what they saw was a dwarf couple going to give birth. It's a succession of lies so grotesque that paradoxically they end up validating that something very big needed to be hidden. If it were just a wild animal, they'd say it was a mangy monkey. If it were collective hysteria, they'd ignore it. But no, they created complex, absurd narratives to justify trucks, blockades, helicopters, and the presence of foreigners in the city. Yes, because out of nowhere, Varginha looked like a NASA branch. Americans were seen at Humanitas Hospital. Unidentified planes landed in Campinas to take the cargo. We need to talk about the smell again. The smell of ammonia that permeated the capture site didn't leave for days. The floor had to be washed with quicklime and heavy chemicals. What kind of terrestrial animal leaves a chemical trail like that? None that I know of. And the fear in the eyes of the military? Young conscripts, 18, 19-year-old boys, who were there following orders and saw their world collapse. Many of these guys today are middle-aged men, fathers, and even today, 30 years later, they tremble when they touch on the subject. Or worse, they stay silent because they know the threat still stands. The pact of silence hasn't been broken, it's just rusted a bit. But the cracks show a darkness we aren't prepared to face. The darkest part of all this isn't the creature. We see monsters in movies. What's truly scary is what happened to Marco Chereze. That name should be in history books, but it was erased. Chereze was a military policeman, young, healthy, full of life. He participated in the capture of the second creature. According to reports, he was the guy who grabbed the being, without gloves, without proper protection, and put it in the police car. He touched it. The oily skin came into direct contact with his skin. Days later, Marco began to waste away. It wasn't a flu, it wasn't a malaise. It was a total collapse of the immune system. An abscess appeared in his armpit, exactly on the side where he would have supported the creature. The doctors didn't understand what was happening. He was taken to the hospital, had surgery to drain it, but the infection wouldn't yield to any known antibiotic. His condition evolved into a generalized infection at a terrifying speed. 26 days. That's how long it took for a strong 23-year-old policeman to die. He died from a cause that official medicine called respiratory failure and infection, but behind the scenes, no one could explain it. Chereze's family was prevented from seeing the body properly. The coffin was sealed quickly. There was no time for questions, for mourning, for anything. The autopsy, a mess of technical terms that said nothing. But the truth leaked through the hospital corridors. The doctors were terrified. They had never seen a bacteria or virus act that way. It was as if Marco's organism had been shut down by something that doesn't belong to this ecosystem, something toxic. If this abyss has gripped you this far, a like is the sign that it was worth going this deep. Subscribe to the channel. There are still many sunken cities waiting to be told. Because Chereze's death is the physical proof, the corpus delicti that the army couldn't fully hide. He was the first human casualty of an extraterrestrial biological contact on Brazilian soil, and no one paid for it. No one took responsibility. They said it was a fatality, a pre-existing health problem that never existed. They lied about a hero's health to protect a state secret, and Humanitas Hospital. In those days, an entire wing was isolated. Doctors and nurses were forbidden from entering certain sectors. Those who entered came out pale. There are reports that the creature taken there didn't survive and died on the operating table, or perhaps arrived dead. The smell invaded the ventilation system. They had to isolate everything. And shortly after, that visit from the Americans. What did the United States have to do with a police operation in southern Minas? Everything. Apparently, Brazil had no technology or protocol for alien biohazards, and Uncle Sam came to collect the material. The American Air Force transport plane that landed in Campinas wasn't there for a stroll. The cargo was transferred in the dead of night, and what was left for us were the doubts and the ridicule of the official explanations. They tried to turn everything into a joke. They made E.T. dolls, used the image for tourism, turned the trauma into a souvenir. It's a classic disinformation tactic. If you can't hide the fact, make it ridiculous. Make people laugh at those who believe. That way, whoever saw the truth is seen as crazy. The girls, their mother who was threatened, the neighbors who saw the movement, all were discredited. But trauma doesn't go away with a joke. The look in those girls' eyes in interviews at the time isn't that of someone wanting attention. It's of someone who saw hell open a crack in their backyard. I wonder what would have happened if we had known the truth at the time. Was society ready? Probably not. But silence is corrosive. The Brazilian army had the chance to lead one of the greatest revelations in human history. Instead, it chose the path of shadow, threat, and cheap lies. 30 years have passed, and the documents remain classified as top secret. Why, if it was just a dog, a homeless man, or a dwarf couple? Why maintain maximum secrecy over something irrelevant? The answer is obvious, because it's not irrelevant, because it changes everything. Varginha wasn't an isolated case of hysteria. It was an accident, a crash. A ship or probe, or whatever it was, malfunctioned and fell where it shouldn't have. The occupants, alive, injured, and terrified, tried to hide. And we, in our infinite ignorance and fear, hunted them like animals. And in the process, we lost one of our own. The scary truth isn't that they exist. The scary truth is that they were here. They bled here. They died here. And we treated the most important event in human history as a sanitary problem that needed to be fumigated and forgotten. Maybe one day the files will be opened. Maybe one day some retired officer with nothing left to lose on his deathbed will tell where the bodies were taken. Until then, we are left with the loose pieces of this macabre puzzle. The smell of ammonia has already dissipated from Varginha, but the smell of lies remains strong, impregnated in the uniforms of those who were there and in the memory of those who saw the inexplicable. We'll see you in the next mystery.